All right, welcome. For those who are joining, we're gonna get started. Usually when you go to events, we have a sign-in sheet where you sign in your name, but considering that we are on Zoom, we ask that the sign-in sheet be the chat box. So if you can type in the chat box, which is on the below your screen, on the bottom of your screen, your name, a faith community or organization that you are affiliated with, and the region that you're joining us from, the city or county or region that you like. And we will get started in 1 minute. Thank you, everyone. All right. Thank you for those who are joining us. We will be starting in a couple of minutes. As you see here, you're joining the webinar, third webinar, Faith-Rooted Organizing, specifically on the campaign we're working on, are joining Drop Life Without Parole, or LWOP, as you may be hearing. We're waiting for more people to come in. So while we're doing that, you can type in your name, faith community, and the region that you're joining us from. This is our sign-in sheet while we're doing things electronically. We would really appreciate that for taking your time to do that. Thank you. For those who don't know, this is a statewide webinar. So as if you want to see on the chat, we have people joining us from Santa Monica all the way to Oakland. So we really appreciate such the diversity that we see here. So I invite you to continue to just scroll in the chat box and see who's joining us. It's really neat to see how much interest there is. So we appreciate all those who are joining us. Thank you. If you do have any technical difficulties sometime during the webinar, you can continue to chat. Our colleague Cecilia Vasquez is online, so she can answer your questions. So feel free, if there anything does come up, we have a person on staff who's helping us here. Okay. We will get started. Okay, so a couple of housekeeping for those who maybe this is your first time on Zoom or you're still getting acquainted with it. Everybody who is entering here is on mute, so we are able to hear the speakers clearly. This webinar is interactive and there'll be many moments where you're able to participate. And the way to participate is through our chat box. So like as I mentioned, feel free to comment, ask questions, engage with our guest speakers today in that form. And then we will be responding questions at the end of the webinar. This webinar is being recorded, so we can send it to you all afterwards and you can share for the people who weren't able to join us today, because I know it's lunchtime on Friday. But this also will be posted on our website afterwards. So if you want to continue to review it again or share with your congregations or groups, you can use this webinar as an educational piece. So as I mentioned, this is our third part of a series of our faith-rooted organizing work here at Interfaith Movement. And this third webinar that we're doing is specifically on dropping life without parole. The way we will have this webinar is beginning with the spiritual centering moment. We will have an overview of our organization for those who are still learning about us. We will ask ourselves, why are we focusing on ending life without parole? And of course, our wonderful guest speakers, Jamil, Ken, Charlie, and Joanna will be sharing much more about ending life without parole from their experience. And we will close with some couple next steps and your questions being answered. So we will begin with a moment to center ourselves. And in Interfaith Movement for Human Integrity, we are an organization that values various faith traditions and spiritual practices. And although through this diversity, there are some things we have in common. The most important one is that all people are sacred. And so we will start with that to center ourselves today. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to bring in the names of people that we are in solidarity with. Some of them are folks who have been recently released from prison or even immigration detention, and we're celebrating that along with their families. Some of those folks may be people who are still inside, fighting really hard for their cases of releases, or probably losing hope, and we want to remember them. Some of these are folks who are sadly have passed inside incarcerated. Some of them passed because they were infected by the coronavirus, mostly out of neglect. And then finally, we want to just name any of the people that we're holding in our hearts, especially right now in such a very heartbreaking moment in our country, in this Black Lives Matter movement. The way you can bring up those names is writing them in the chat box. And I'm also going to ask our guest speakers to unmute themselves, and they can say the names of the people that they're holding at this moment. But the rest of the audience will remain on mute, and you can put in your names in the chat box.
I'll go ahead. This is Joanne. I'd like to hold up my son, Tony. I'd like to hold up his cellmate, Rodney Fletcher. I'd like to hold up Trevor Landers and every single man and woman doing life without parole in prison.
This is Jerry Silva. I'd like to hold up Melinda Jones at CIW, Ronell Ross, Spoon Jackson, both of whom have been in prison over 40 years, Francisco Garcia, who just got the virus, David Carreño, and Ernie Mora. And like Joanne, all of them.
Yeah, this is Ken Hartman. I'd like to hold up my friends Robert Chan, John Tapia, Jimmy Gilmer, and Robert Smith, all of whom have serving life without parole, and all of the other 5,200 plus men and women serving life without parole in California, and the 55,000 around the country.
I too would like to hold up Robert Chan, Dara Yin, Micah Thomas, Michael Halleck, and just all my brothers and sisters that are still serving our WAP.
This is Jamil Wilson. I would like to hold up and Win. This is a gentleman that got commuted. We were sitting in the holding tank the day that we got released, but the INS came and got him, and he still is in detention for the last 6 months since I've been free. My ex-cellmate, Hung Nguyen, he also got commuted with me, but he got delayed 2 years, and as a blessing, he goes to the board this November. And I would also like to talk about Joseph Wethington, John Doss, Edwin Smith. These are gentlemen that I know personally that deserve a second chance. And also I'm fighting for, like it's already been said, the 5,300 people in the state of California that has the LWOP sentence, and also the tens of thousands of men and women across this country that's also serving life without the possibility of parole. Thank you.
Hi, this is Ingrid Mittermeier. I wanted to lift up a really dear friend of mine, Gustavo Priego Hernandez, who is serving a life without parole sentence as well. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Please, we're going to move on, but continue to write those names. Continue to scroll through the chat box and read them to yourselves one by one, because they are here with us in spirit. And I will close this moment of centering with a short prayer. O Creator of life, who made us in your divine image, you gaze upon the human family with compassion. May each one of us be healed from the fear, hatred, and indifference that infects our hearts and prevents us to behold one another's dignity. Move us, life-giving Spirit, to make amends and act in solidarity towards those who are suffering from oppression. May each one of us reach out to liberate those who are incarcerated, to reunite separated families, and offer hospitality into our communities. May it be so. I will now pass the mic, per se, to Dr. Reverend Larry Foy, who is coordinator of our Justice Not Jails program in Los Angeles.
Good afternoon, everyone. Delighted to see you joining in on our webinar. Before I go any further, just say we also want to reflect upon what's happening in our country in light of the George Floyd death. So let's be mindful of that. I noticed that some of you reference him in the chat box. But anyway, I want to just share some information with you about the Interfaith Movement for Human Integrity. We are involved in practicing collective liberation. And to that end, we work in 3 regions in the state of California. We work in the Bay Area, we work in Los Angeles, and we also work in the Inland Empire. In the Bay Area, our efforts stems around immigration detention. We do freedom campaigns for releases, and we accompany immigrants once they are released. And also we accompany them to court. In the Inland Empire, we often are present at Adelanto Detention Center, where we also conduct freedom campaigns, and we are very active in supporting the shutdown of Adelanto. And here in Los Angeles, we've supported efforts to stop new jail construction. We are also involved in holding the sheriff accountable, and we advocate for alternative solutions other than prison and jails. We operate out of this framework: mend the past, heal the present, and transform the future. We mend the past by addressing the root cause of institutional racism in this country, which is basically punitive incarceration and detention systems, and the racially scapegoating of people of color and immigrants. We attempt to heal the present by engaging in liberating acts and by accompanying people who are most impacted. We advocate for policies to change these systems. and we work to transform the future by envisioning a future that creates a beloved community. And beloved community is where all have goods, equal goods and equal access, equal opportunity. So we also are engaged in 3 statewide campaigns. Our Faith Organizing for Liberation operates, we operate, focus on 3 campaigns. Our statewide campaigns include in the collaboration between ICE and prisons. Our other focus is the end for profit private prisons and immigration detention in California. And our third statewide campaign is the one that we are addressing today, Drop Life Without Parole. We welcome you again, and you may ask why Drop Life Without Parole. Well, it's right at the core root of our values, and that is to say that we hold everyone sacred. Every life is sacred, no matter what he or she has done or even will do. So we engage in this campaign because we value the sacredness of human life. Just because a person is incarcerated or detained, that person does not lose her or his humanity. I'm one of those 50,000 people, at least I have a family member who's one of those 50,000 or more people who are serving a life without parole. I have a brother who's been incarcerated in another region of this country, in Angola State Prison in Louisiana, where in Louisiana, life means life. And he's been there now, as I mentioned, for 40 years. So I know the pain and agony behind life without parole as a family member. Life without parole, as one person has described it, is just really the death penalty in disguise. Someone else has described it as just an alternative or the death penalty replacement. And some of our friends who you hear from later and partners and former lifers will tell you that life without parole is really just the second death. And so we take up this campaign because we don't believe in the death penalty, nor do we believe that people should be sentenced to a life that's going to end in death behind bars, where persons are basically closed off many opportunities of rehabilitation. They're closed off from hope of redemption. They are closed off with the hope of restitution and reconciliation. And they are closed off from the opportunity of family reunification. And what I mean by that is that when you have life without parole, folk are cut off from their spouses, they are cut off from their children. They are likely to never be able to attend their parents' funeral. That certainly has happened with my older brother when our father died some 13 years ago because he had LWP, could not attend the funeral. And our mother is actually transitioning at this very moment, and he will not be able to attend her funeral. So I have a personal skin in this game, and I'm just glad to be a part of an organization who's willing to step forward and rally the faith community around all of those folk who should be have their sentences commuted, or they should have lesser sentences. So when we talk about life without parole, there is a connection with incarceration and immigrant deportation. We Some folk tend to see them separately, but they are not separately. They intersect. Just as I mentioned earlier, when a person is incarcerated, that person does not lose her or his humanity. The same is true when people cross the border. They do not lose their humanity. Just as life without parole is a second death sentence, when we send folk back to their countries, when we deport immigrants, and many occasions and many times we're sending them back to death. We're giving them a death sentence. They come to this country not to commit violence, as some will argue, but they come from this country fleeing violence. And so when we detain them and then deport them back to their countries, we're sending many of them back into the violence from which they fled, and their lives are threatened. So there is an intersection between life without parole, with mass incarceration in this country, and immigrant detention. Both are driven by laws that are retributive, and that they are driven by punishment. And we hope to change that. We hope to change the narrative and to talk about redemption, rehabilitation, and restoration of persons back into society. So to that end, we hope that you're going to join us in this fight, join Families United, and join Fair Chance Project as we embark upon this campaign. I think I'm back to Miriam.
Yes, thank you. So, as I mentioned, as Larry mentioned, we're a faith-rooted organization, and it's a specific model that really stems all campaigns to be based on the values of faith. We are an organization that appreciates all faith traditions. And so in our analysis of why life without parole, of why as people of faith, wherever your tradition is, it is important to be in solidarity with life without parole. We've come up to begin with these three values. As it was said, every person is sacred. A person's worth should not be determined on their worst mistake. And everyone has the capacity for transformation. An exercise we do to kind of get to these points is something called unveiling the lies that shape our cultural mindset that makes us tolerant to injustice. For example, one of the lies that the civil rights movement said was, some people are worth more than others. And what the faith values helps us think critically to reveal faith truths that confront these lies and really make a cultural shift. So the truths that the civil rights movement brought forth was that we are all God's children and we are all loved equally regardless of our race. And the truths are specifically impactful in justice movements when they come from the people who are most impacted themselves, because they are unveiling the lies that sometimes we have taken for granted, that we just swim in it and we can't think of any others. And so that's why we invited some guest speakers, all three of them. Thank you, in partnership with Families United to End Life Without Parole and the Fair Chance Project. So now I'm going to pass it on to this partnering organizations. Our three guests will be talking about their experience, not just their experiences, but also the faith that has helped them through this. They'll also talk about the lies and the truths. So thank you so much. And I will pass that now to Jamil.
I just want to say good afternoon to all the people that are here attending this webinar. And before I start, I just want to give a big thank you for all the men and women and the many organizations that's out here that's actually put in the work and that are actually fighting for us men and women that are incarcerated with LWOP and other harsh sentences. With that, the first thing I would like to talk about is a lie. And it's a lie that was told to me when I got sentenced with life without the possible parole. The day that I got sentenced, the lie was that the act that I committed wasn't just an act. The act was so senseless that it came from an individual as myself that I was irredeemable, that I did not have the possibility or the capacity to change. And that was a lie. Because as you can see that I'm here today as a changed person. And so to tell you a little bit about my background story, I come from a middle-class family, only child. And at the age of 15, as a young, irresponsible young man, I decided to move out my house. And moving out from my parents' care, I start to live a life of irresponsibility. I hung around with the wrong people. I engaged myself in activities. Can you hear me? Okay. And which led to a life of depression. And from the age of 17 to 20, I can honestly say I was an alcoholic. I was a drug addict. I was living my life in a criminal lifestyle. And on the night of my 20th birthday, myself and three other young gentlemen committed a senseless murder. Though I was not the person that actually pulled the trigger, I was convicted as an aider and abetter and a conspirator to this horrendous murder. I went to trial, I got convicted, and was sentenced life without the possibility of parole. Now, early on in my incarceration, I played the victim role. I felt like, yeah, I was there, but I had nothing to do with it. And that's just coming from a mind of a young individual that was immature, that didn't understand about accepting responsibility in the part that I played. Because many times that evening, I had a chance to stop the act from happening and I didn't do it. And so the law says, if I was there and I did not stop the crime from happening, I am just as guilty as a person that actually pulled the trigger. So I was sentenced with life without possible parole. And for the first few years, I didn't accept that responsibility. I felt like I was a victim. I was a victim of this justice system. And it wasn't until a gentleman named Hakeem introduced me to Islam and Islamic foundation and the teachings of the Quran, and really studying about my role as a human on this planet and my responsibilities to the society, to the community, to the world at large, and the relationship that I have with God, until I actually started to change my behavior. The way I changed my behavior was first changing the way I was thinking. Because up to that point, my thought process was askew because I was looking at the world with selfish eyes, with selfish means, right? And once I started living my life for others and trying to live my life selflessly, that's when true rehabilitation started. So I've been practicing Islam now for a little over 25 years. And I can honestly say, it's almost as like when we're inside, we are afforded to attend AA and NA classes, and those are spiritually grounded. We always seek for a higher power to guide us and to help us. And for me, Islam is my checking point because 5 times a day, at least, I'm obligated to check in with myself to see where I'm at, what am I thinking, making amends for the wrongs that I've committed just during the time between prayer to prayer. And it was through Islam that I really understood forgiveness. Because once I became realization of accepting responsibility for my actions, it was really hard for me to forgive myself. And then we also learned that God is forgiving, forever merciful. And just knowing that allowed me to live with literally a death sentence for many years. And Islam literally transformed my life. Because even though I was given life without positive parole, I was given a second chance to redeem my life. What could I do as I'm living on this planet, even behind the prison wall, to give back to the society? Because the truth of the matter is, the same gentlemen that I walk the yards with that do not have life sentences, whether they have 16 months or 16 years, one day they're gonna come home. And I took it upon myself to help those gentlemen become better people as I was transforming inside. And I'd just like to give a quick shout out to Brother Kenneth Hartman, that's about to speak after me, because he came up with this program at Lancaster A Yard, which became a pilot program, which was Progressive Program Facility, PPF Yard. And what they did was they tried to change how prison was ran. Instead of a punishment, they brought many rehabilitative classes to the yard for the men to partake in, to help the healing process. And once we heal our traumas that we endured in our youth, that's when true rehabilitation can happen. We can accept responsibility for our actions, and we can really grow as men and give back to society. And so thank you, Kenneth, for bringing that program. I was part of that program for 6 years. And because of that program, I was able to prove to the governor's office of all the changes I've made in the 26 years of incarceration, that I finally got a commutation under Governor Brown. I went to the board, and they gave me a second chance. I had to go in there and prove my worth. And I've been home for the last 5.5 months now. And one of the things I can say that I struggle with is because I left many good men behind that is just as deserving as myself, if not more. They've been in prison 20, 30, 40, almost 50 years. And I'm just praying that one day that they'll have a chance to come home just as myself. So until then, I'll be out here to find men and women and fighting with other organizations to end this life without the positive parole sentence. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jamil. It's really courageous when people share their stories, and we appreciate you. The way we do that here at Interfaith Movement, I invite you all, is 3 gestures that we do. The first gesture is to place our hands on our head. So I invite everybody to place your hand on your head and take a moment to reflect to yourselves, how has Jamil's story, his experience, shifted something, our perspective? Then we place our hands over our heart and we reflect what is coming up, what has touched us, how has Jamil touched us. And third, we extend our hands outwards towards Jamil as an act of commitment and solidarity to continue to support him as well as others to be integrated with justice in our community. Thank you so much, Jamil. Our next guest speaker is Kenneth Hartman. Kenneth, would you like to share with us a little bit?
Yes, thank you, Miriam. And of course, the first thing I want to say is I just want to thank Jamil for that wonderful shout out. Jamil was one of the people that benefited the most and did the most good for the most people on the progressive programming facility. He was a mentor and an exemplar of all the things that we hoped to accomplish there. So thank you, Jamil. I really appreciate that. And I appreciate you tremendously. Yeah, I think what I want to say is, so when Governor Brown began commuting people's sentences, I was one of the first 2 people in California to get out. And I served 38 years. When I was 19 years old, I killed a man named Thomas Allen Fellows in a drunken fistfight. Yeah, it was a terrible thing to do, and I live with the remorse from that to this day, and I will never forget Mr. Fellows. And I will continue to live as good a life as I can in remembrance of him and never forget him. When I finally got out, I felt a tremendous obligation to the people that I left behind. As Jamil said, and I'm sure Charlie will say in a few minutes, there are 5,200 plus men and women and more than 50,000 men and women in the United States also serving life without the possibility of parole. So I would go to places and I would speak. And I've been to multiple colleges around the country speaking. And one of the things I would say to people is I'd say, you know, one of the things you have to remember when you're thinking about people in prison is they're human beings just like you. And people would always start to clap. And at first I was very encouraged by that. I thought, oh, that's really great. But then after a couple of times it struck me and I started asking the audiences and I would say, are you clapping because you're surprised to learn that people in prison are human beings? Did you think that we were not human beings? And I think this is sort of the crux of everything that I've done. While I was an activist against life without the possibility of parole. I started something called the Other Death Penalty Project. I'm still working on that since I've been out. I'm still involved in life without parole activism. And one of the things we tried to say to people was, people serving life without the possibility of parole are human beings. And human beings are capable of change. They're capable of transformation. And I think when we look at this idea of, you know, the unveiling the lie, you know, the lie of life without the possibility of parole is that some people cannot become better than their worst moments. Some people are not really humans. I think that's what that says, because human beings are capable of change and growth. It's sort of what's inherent in what makes us human. And, you know, the truth is that people inside, people who have committed terrible acts, are capable of growth. And at the very least, every single human being who has committed a terrible act, and I am one of them, should at least have the opportunity to try to change and to try to have the opportunity to demonstrate that they are a different human being now. And I was raised in the Catholic tradition myself, and I'm certainly not the best exemplar of Catholicism, but I'm always reminded of the passage in the Bible that's quoted on the slide here from Hebrews. You know, be mindful of prisoners as if sharing their imprisonment. I always thought that was a beautiful statement right there, that, you know, remember the people inside as if you're in there with them, you know. And there used to be a saying when I was a kid, you know, there but for the grace of God go I. You know, I didn't intend to kill Mr. Fellows. I was drunk. We got in a stupid argument. Nothing he did was his fault. It was all my fault. But it's not like I was running around looking for someone to kill. I was an angry young man. I was 19 years old. Like the majority of people who are sentenced to life without parole in California, they're 19 years old and it's their first time in prison. And the system says your life is over. You can never become better than this moment in your life. And interestingly, now there have been, I think, 154 people's sentences have been commuted since Governor Brown started the commutation process. Governor Newsom has commuted a few people as well, and we strongly encourage him to continue to commute people. We ultimately hope that all humans serving life without the possibility of parole sentences are commuted so that they have an opportunity to go to the board and demonstrate that they have rehabilitated and are able to be safely released into society. But the interesting thing is that there are now 50 or 60 of us, I believe, who have gotten out, and we're all living good lives. We are all participating in our communities. We're all doing events like this where we're talking to people and we're letting people know that there are a large body of human beings who are sitting behind prison walls, electric fences, inside cells, who have been told that their lives are over and they can never be better. And people like Jamil and Charlie, who you're going to meet in a few minutes, and myself, you know, that's what we did when we were in. You know, we knew we weren't going to get out, but we knew we were surrounded by a bunch of people who were, and we still cared about our communities. We wanted to send people out who would do better and wouldn't come back and wouldn't end up in positions where they caused any harm. So most of us became mentors and became people who taught and helped and gave counsel to younger people who were getting out and helping them to become better people themselves so they could get out and do well. And I think that's a testament to the human spirit. And I think it's a testament to the fact that, and again, no one needs to applaud this, but the people inside prison, particularly people with life without parole, but of course, every single person in prison is a human being and should be accorded the same dignity and, you know, and value as every other human being. So that's what I have to say. And thank you for listening. I deeply appreciate it. And thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you so much. Again, let's have a moment to do the same gestures for Kenneth. So let's place our hands on our head to reflect what has shifted in our perspective. Let's place our hands over our hearts and be present to emotions coming up for us. And then extend our hands outwards towards Kenneth as a commitment of solidarity. Thank you, Kenneth.
Thank you.
And then for our third speaker, I'm inviting Charlie. To share his experience.
For me, my experience was, you know, just growing up, not having any real direction or understanding what life was, and creating this ego or persona of where I thought my life was supposed to be. And unfortunately, because of that ego and because of the road I took, you know, I ended up taking Mr. Robert Goodwin's life. And as Kenneth said, these are things we all have to live with for the rest of our lives. And, you know, really just being out here and having that opportunity to live the best life I can in honor of Mr. Goodwin is all I can really do. So my thing is this, is like, you know, like Jamil said, because Ken started the honor yard, now the PPF yard, you know, that being able to be a part of that program kind of really helped me find perspective, because, you know, once you're sentenced to life without, and that really hits home, because, you know, let's face it, when you first get that sentence, me, like a lot of other people, are like, oh, you know what, I got appeals, I'm gonna beat this. And, you know, again, I was young, I did not want to accept responsibility for my actions or for anything that I did. I didn't want to be responsible for Mr. Goodwin losing his life. But, you know, it was that yard and that opportunity that helped me really grow as a person. And because of that, you know, we got to build these communities, and we got to set these foundations on positive things in the most negative environment on earth, I think. You know, and it's those opportunities that really, I think, draw people to that yard, and you know, especially life without, you know, LWOPs, they see a community that is a dirty reflection of society, I guess, for lack of a better term. And you know, it's getting those things where you don't have what's prison politics. You don't have to, you know, worry about making friends with other races and stuff. You can do all that. You can eat after them. You can go play sports with them. I mean, it's the only prison that's like that, where you don't have those things. And you know, it's built on a foundation of change and rehabilitation, where when you get there, the things that Ken had, you know, envisioned and stuff, as far as you got to make plans of what your short-term goals are, what your long-term goals are of being there. How are you going to utilize that program to better yourself? It's those things and those kind of opportunities that most people don't think that's a big thing. But when you have to accept the fact that you're going to die in prison, those are little glimmers of hope that, you know what, I might get to do something good. I might be able to show the people that I care about that I've changed and how I can change. And you know, again, for me, being a part of it, you know, I was fortunate enough to have Sally Robert Chan, who just really helped me get involved in things and really helped me put my creativity out there. You know, with his help, you know, I started a crochet program on a level 4 prison, which is just insane. But you know, it was the environment that allowed that, and it was you know, it was that program, because people saw the value of just being able to do things, be able to give back to the community and be of service. I mean, for me, you know, that's something that wasn't really there in my youth and stuff, and just not really having that direction. But you know, on this journey, you know, through my rehabilitation, through addressing my traumas and just understanding how I got to be that person, you know, it wasn't always a fun journey, but it was a very self-fulfilling journey, in the sense that, you know, I learned so much about myself and how to carry myself, to where I don't have those ego trips. I don't have those pride issues of, you know, how people might come at you certain ways and you feel you have to respond. None of that matters. I mean, you get this totally different perspective on the value of freedom and the value of what you have, and you come to learn the different ways to deal with that. And you know, again, I can't stress enough how just awesome it is to be recognized for your hard work and your dedication, and to be given that opportunity for a second chance, and to be able to be out here and not just be free, but to be able to be a voice for the voiceless, to be a voice for our brothers and sisters still there, to fight the fight, even though we don't have to. But I feel I do, because, you know, again, there's friendships I made in there. There's people I really care about, because through my journey, they were there. And, you know, that's significant part of my whole process of, you know, socialization, my networking and stuff. And, you know.
Thank you, Charlie. I really appreciate that. So let's do our gesture of appreciation for Charlie at this moment. Let's place our hands over our head to reflect what has shifted in our perspective. Let's place our hands over our heart to be present to what's coming up for us. And let's extend our hands towards Charlie, the sign of commitment and solidarity for all the people he also is advocating for through his testimony. Thank you, Charlie. So in this past couple minutes, each of our guest speakers talked about a lie and a truth. And this will be a moment we would like to continue this exercise because this is hard for us to really think critically. Because like I mentioned at the beginning, it's cultural lies that makes us tolerate to have a person be sentenced with a life without a chance of parole. And then there's so many there, and although Governor Newsom has already given commutations, there's many more. So what I'm gonna invite the audience is to continue to think, what are some lies that you have heard about why it's okay to leave people in prison, have a sentence of life without parole? And we invite you to put those lies into the chat box. An example that one of our guest speakers just talked about was that some people are incapable of change. That was an example of a lie. What are some lies, if you want to type them into the chat box, that you have heard? And then we're going to invite some of the guest speakers probably address those for a little bit. What are some other lies we've heard that in our culture? Elsie says, a crime has been committed and must be paid for. Joanne writes, victims of crime deserve justice by keeping criminals in prison. A life needs to be given for a life, writes Charles. Jean writes, the only way, oh, sorry, you guys are writing fast. Great, keep writing them. I can't read them all at the same time, but go for it. So these are the lies that we're hearing and we're really trying to unveil because those are the ones that are sneaky. So continue writing them. We need this kind of practice. And so now think of, from the lie that you just entered, think about a truth that says that's not true, right? This is the alter to that. Like I mentioned, the truth that was given as an example is human beings are capable of change. Another truth, what I heard is every person has a role in this world. So now, why don't we take some time to write in the chat box the truths that go with that, reveal that these are lies in our culture. Some of the truths that our organization has been reflecting on is that no one's dignity is measured by their worst mistake. So we consider that as an example of a truth. Thank you. There's a truth of prisoners are human. It is worth the cost of to help people to achieve transformation. Thank you. I would like to just briefly invite any of the guest speakers, if you want to just respond to some things that you really feel like you would like to address.
Yeah, I'd like to just make one comment. I think I noticed several people made the sort of the lie that, you know, people have to pay for what they've done wrong. And all three of us, I know, that because Jamil and Charlie are both good friends of mine, I know their hearts pretty well. We all completely agree that human beings should be accountable for what they do, and there's no question of that. But the question becomes, is the payment reach a point where it isn't actually payment, it's just vengeance? And then if we have a system that's based on vengeance, then we don't have justice, and we end up with the kind of inequitable, unfair, biased system that we have right now that results in the kind of terrible atrocities that we've all seen over the last, week or so that have just been, heartrending. But I mean, I think it's, I think there's an idea somehow that this paying with blood is somehow makes things better, and it just doesn't, and it never has. So.
Thank you. Any Charlie or Jamil? and then we'll move on to the call to action. But I just want to see if either of you want to respond to something that you noticed from the chat.
I think Ken nailed it. Oh, I really got too much to add to that.
Okay, great.
I do like to make a comment though.
Sure.
This is Jamil. One of the main things that they bring up when the powers that be have these roundtable discussions about possibly ending life without a positive parole sentence, and the people that fight against ending it, is that those people that committed that horrendous act many decades ago, which they have served, would, if released, would be might commit more acts of violence, right? And that's a lie, because the truth, the statistics says it all, right? We have a saying that numbers don't lie, and the truth of the matter is that lifers, just regular lifers, or people that are afforded to go to the parole board, and the commissioners made a decision and found them suitable for release, that they deemed they were not a threat to the safety of the community. Less than 1% of those lifers that serve 20, 25, 30 or plus years, once given the opportunity to parole, less than 1%, I believe is 0.07%, actually commit a new crime or go back to prison. And out of that percentage, 1 out of 5 of those people in that percentage actually is for a felony of violence, and the rest might be for drug cases or something like that. So that statistics is a lie. Whereas, just in comparison, whereas someone that served that weren't lifers, and however many years that they did, and they weren't required to take any introspection, they were not required to take any rehabilitation classes or make any changes, and they were released. The percentage is within 3 years, somewhere around 45% of them recidivism rate. So they do go back to prison. So I just want to say the safety and security issue, that is totally false.
Thank you. That's a big one. I think that's also a very big one from my experience of working with immigration detention. That's also a big intersection of danger to society if they're released. Thank you. Thank you everyone for participating. This is an exercise we want to continue to do. And now I'm going to pass on to Joanne, who was also part of Families United for Ending Life Without Parole, to tell us what are some call to actions in regards to really making sure that this is a policy change. So Joanne, welcome. And if you want to introduce yourself as well.
Oh, thank you. Thanks everybody for sharing your stories. It's always so deeply touching to me. I'm Joanne Shear. I'm the founder of Felony Murder Elimination Project and also an organizer for FUEL, Families United to End LWOP. I've been at this for 13 years now. My only child is serving life without parole as an aider and abetter under felony murder. And one thing I would very much like to say regarding what our 3 guest gentlemen have been talking about, we're all talking about lies and truth. And what the truth of the matter is that this situation of being of finding yourself in a situation as a young adult, as a youth offender, which is the highest number of people serving life without parole when they get charged and convicted. Their brains are not fully developed, and so they can't see far consequences. So any young adult can be placed in a situation in a perfect storm where something like this happens. When somebody's had too much to drink, somebody's had using drugs, and things suddenly turn out of control. So it could happen to anybody. What happens is that when a trial comes, a prosecutor is when a trial goes on, a prosecutor is makes a very firm showing of how monstrous this person is in order to get a win in a trial situation. When somebody is convicted and sentenced to life without parole, what happens is that that person who's been sentenced does not have the opportunity to show his remorse, to show her remorse. They're not able to, after years of being in prison and attending programs and finding out and being able to see what their part in that, what their participation, the absolute outflow of what that situation caused, of the hurt and the trauma that it caused. There's no way of them coming back and saying, I'm so sorry. There's nobody to say I'm sorry to. And many times somebody who's given a life without parole sentence, they're put in level 4 prisons that don't have a lot of these wonderful programs that then Ken Hartman and had set up in Lancaster. So it's a long road of not being able to say you're sorry and show how remorseful you really are. We need to give every single person in prison the opportunity to say that, to own what their participation was, and to say that they're sorry and to show their remorse. That's a truth. Life without parole is, you have nowhere to put that. You have nothing to give back to the community. You're not being given the opportunity to come before a parole board and say, this is how I've changed. This is what I'd like to give back to my community because I'm so sorry for what I've done. We're trying to, Felony Murder Elimination Project, the Drop LWOP Coalition, with Fuel, and all of these organizations are trying to educate our legislators about what life without parole is and what kind of a sentence and how we can change the law so that everybody will be given the opportunity to go before the parole board. So what we're doing, there is a way forward that we can change the special circumstances law. And but we need a 2/3 vote in the 2/3 majority vote in the legislature to do that. That's a hard lift. It's a hard ask, but we can do that. So what we're trying to do is gather constituents and people, organizers in our organizations, to have Zoom meetings with their district legislators. Since we're not able to meet in person right now because of COVID, we're trying to set up Zoom meetings with constituents, with their district legislators, to talk to them about life without parole sentencing, and how we can come to, in our ask that they pass a bill that we are hoping to bring next year regarding life without parole and special circumstances. The coalition has put out a letter and a Google form, so that all you'd have to do is fill out that Google form with your name, your address, and it has a section in there where you can click on a link to see who your district assembly member is and who your district senator is. And we're asking you to fill that in, and we will get in contact with you we're going to have a Zoom meeting to educate people as to exactly what special circumstances are, which ones we can change, and to educate in order to have these Zoom meetings, to educate the legislators. So our call to action is for everybody to look at that Google form, fill it out. That information will come back to us. We will contact you about when we will have our education Zoom meeting, and then we will set up a Zoom meeting with us and with you as a constituent, and hopefully getting some of our formerly incarcerated LWOPs on this Zoom meeting to show that these are the people that we are trying to that who deserve a second chance. Every single person deserves a second chance. So that's our call to action. Please fill out the form letter, fill in your district senator and assembly member, and join us on our education Zoom meeting so that we can reach our legislators to make this change. I thank you, everybody, for all of your heart, your soul, your stories, and your passion in bringing justice and mercy back to our loved ones, our men and women who are serving horrendous sentences under LWOP. Thank you.
Thank you, Joanne. The links here, we will be sending them to everyone as a follow-up email, both the sign-in letter and the Google form. So there will be two separate Google forms that we will send to everyone after this webinar. And then finally, Larry, do you want to guide us into the next steps? Are you still with us, Larry? Well,
You're muted.
I forgot to mute myself.
Yeah.
But anyway, this webinar is being recorded, so we want you to share it with others, anyone that you know, your constituents, and persons who are involved in, who are interested in justice work, especially criminal justice reform. Secondly, we'd like to invite you to join our Justice Not Jails meetings, which is held on every first Thursday of the month. Our next meeting will be July 2nd, 2020, but there'll be no June meeting. So it's a virtual meeting, as most meetings are now. And hopefully in the future, we'll resume a person-to-person meeting. So if you're ever in Los Angeles community, then you're more than welcome. And one other thing, if I may, Miriam, before we leave, is that Jerry Silver has been on the webinar all of this time. She's one of the key leaders in the LWOP movement, and I just like for her to at least introduce her, say hello to the folk on this webinar.
Thank you, Larry. Got to unmute myself. I just so appreciate that the interfaith movement for human integrity is taking this on. It's like we plead for people to understand that the injustices that go on are so horrendous, but we're living in a country with just overwhelming injustice. So this is just like one of them, but if we can get on board with this, if we can take this on and come to some kind of solution to end this here and everywhere, Larry, so your brother can be free, that's just a step in the direction of getting some real justice in this country, which we don't have now. I thank you so much, Larry. And not only Larry, Miriam and Deborah Lee, thank you.
Thank you, and thank you to you, Joanne, Jamil, Charlie, and Kenneth for joining us. Right now, we are opening it up for some questions and answers. I do want to begin with two that I noticed people entered in the chat box. And then as I go through these, if other people want to write your questions, please do so in the chat box. If we won't get to all of them, I invite some of the guest speakers to respond to the questions on the chat box. So we won't have to go on too much over time. So the first question was, what percentage of women are life without parole? And what are the crimes that we see some of the women do? I don't know if any of you can answer to that.
I can say, Jerry, should I go ahead?
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
The only thing I'm going to say is that, and I have had the great privilege and honor to have met several women who were formerly serving life without the possibility of parole, and a really terrible, disproportionate number of them were victims of domestic violence and were caught into terrible situations, often defending themselves, or their partner was committing crimes, and they ended up being caught up in a web of things that wasn't really their fault. So I feel there's really a tremendous level of injustice for women serving life without parole in prison. Too many of them were literally victims of terrible situations. So I've learned that, and it's really heartbreaking.
Right. And included in those are trans folk who are sex trafficked. There's not any words for the inhumanity. So thank you for the question.
Yeah. The second question that was asked was, are the folks who are serving life without parole, are any of those in for-profit prisons?
No, Ken is shaking his head
Yeah, I
no.
don't think so.
Okay. So most of them are
Not in California. There may be in other states. I can't say that, but in California, there are no state prisoners any longer serving in private prisons.
Thank you. And maybe one last question. How many of Life Without Parole have access to programs like the program that was shared by you, Ken and Jamil? And how long do they have to serve before they can access meaningful programs?
I think as far as access to programs, it depends. They have various programs that are throughout, like all the prisons. You just have to be able to utilize them. The problem with most GP yards, if they're active, is you're not going to be able to participate if you're on lockdown, which happens a lot. But again, it's, I guess, for lack of better terms, being creative and inventive and trying to find people at prisons, whether they're free staff, whether they're teachers, employees, and just telling them, like, look, there's this program, I'd like your assistance. And it's not always going to work, but I mean, that's how we started, and that's how, we got a lot of the stuff that we did is through free staff there, namely a particular teacher, Mr. Underwood, who really was a sponsor for a lot of this stuff that me, Ken, and Robert Chan and Jimmy Gilmer and just started education-wise, trauma-based wise, all that stuff. It's assessing your surrounding and trying to find ways to rise up in it. You know what I mean? It's never easy, but again, finding programs, possibly if there's organizations that run programs, GOGI, stuff like that, reach out to them and try to get them to come in, and that's how it kind of begins. It's it's a work in progress. Each prison is different. You have different people, so that's all I gotta say.
Thank you.
And could I add to that, Miriam? Many times, life without parole, people who are serving life without parole, if they're, in every program that you've got, there's a certain amount of room. Okay, there's only so many people who can participate. So a lot of times, somebody who has a like a 25 to life or anything to life, that it will be given the opportunity to go before the parole board, they will be given that spot in the class before somebody who is serving a life without parole sentence can be in it. So we need to do a better job in prisons across California at getting programs that are designed for life without parole for people serving that sentence, and for affording them more programs across the board in California.
Thank you. Well, I think that will conclude our webinar for today. Thank you so much for the questions and for the guest speakers who are answering the questions also in the chat box. Like I mentioned, this is being recorded and will be sent to everyone in an email along with the call to actions. And we're also going to be sending everyone stories from Fuel of other families and people who are supporting their loved ones who have life without parole. So please keep an eye out for your email for more resources. And I really appreciate everybody's time today in learning about this, and continue to practice the faith-rooted analysis of what are the lies and what is our truths that come from our faith perspective to combat that. I really appreciate everyone, and have a great afternoon.
Shalom.
Thank you so much.
Thank you all. Thank you all for the speakers.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for coming. Thank you for your ear.